Ah, the sweet, shrill sound of the school bell, that tiny metal tyrant that decided when we could speak, move, eat, or even think. It didn't matter whether you were in the middle of solving a math problem or deeply contemplating the meaning of life through your doodle's ring. And off you went, like a trained pigeon with a backpack. The bell ruled everything. It was the soundtrack of our youth, that high-pitched announcement that freedom had arrived, or more often, that freedom was over. You could always tell what kind of day it was going to be by the first bell. If it rang and you were already in class, congratulations, you were a responsible citizen. But if you heard it echoing while you were still sprinting across the courtyard, clutching your half-zipped bag and the world's driest sandwich, then you knew it was time to activate mission, avoid eye contact with the teacher. The bell had that magical ability to transform calm, polite children into Olympic-level sprinters with a death wish, and oh, those teachers who took the bell as a suggestion instead of a rule. You'd hear the bell ring, your pen already midair, backpack half on, and then you'd hear those tragic words, "The bell doesn't dismiss you, I dismiss you." That phrase alone caused more silent suffering than any pop quiz ever could. We all knew it was a lie. The bell did dismiss us. The bell was the law. The bell was democracy in its purest form. Every school had its own unique rhythm. Some schools had cheerful, polite chimes, like something you'd hear at a polite dinner party. Others had the kind of bell that sounded like an industrial fire alarm, as if the entire building were collapsing every 45 minutes. But no matter how it sounded, we all had that Pavlovian response, ring equals move. And move we did down crowded hallways that smelled suspiciously like a combination of gym socks, pencil shavings, and mystery cafeteria lasagna. Let's not forget the drama of trying to make it to the next class before the next bell. You had exactly 4 minutes to pack your books, chat with your friends, dodge the hallway couples pretending to be in a slow-motion movie scene, and somehow find your way to the other side of the campus. It was like an episode of The Amazing Race, School Edition. If you made it with time to spare, you were basically a hero. If not, you were writing the next sad poem in detention. And then there was lunchtime, the most anticipated bell of all. That was the freedom bell, the one that could turn even the grumpiest student into a cheerful philosopher. The bell would ring, and suddenly the entire school transformed. Conversations erupted, cafeteria trays clattered, and even the teachers looked slightly more human. For 30 or 40 glorious minutes, the world made sense. It didn't matter if your lunch was gourmet or a squished sandwich that had been through a minor car crash. That bell made it taste like victory. But of course, not all bells were friendly. The morning bell, for example, was public enemy number 1. That bell was an alarm clock's evil twin. It didn't care that your bus was late, your hair was a disaster, or your alarm didn't go off. When it rang, you had 2 choices: accept your fate or attempt the greatest stealth entry in school history. Everyone tried it at least once, slipping into class mid-lesson, holding your breath, praying the teacher wouldn't notice. Spoiler, they always noticed. Funny thing is, we all had this strange love-hate relationship with that bell. We hated how it controlled us, but we depended on it completely. Without it, we'd have been lost. The day the bell system broke down was like the apocalypse. No one knew when to switch classes, teachers were guessing, students were wandering like confused explorers. It was chaos, and deep down, we realized that the bell, for all its tyranny, actually gave life some rhythm. And that rhythm extended beyond school hours. Even years later, that sound still lingers in our brains. You could be at the grocery store, hear a random beep, and suddenly your brain says, "Time for recess." It's almost nostalgic the way the bell signaled not just schedule changes, but tiny emotional shifts. It told us when to focus, when to relax, and when to dream about escaping to summer vacation. Sometimes I think the bell was our first introduction to adulthood, learning to measure our lives in segments, to obey invisible signals, to rush even when we didn't understand why. It trained us to live on deadlines, to listen for cues, to anticipate endings before we were ready. That's probably why so many of us still live by alarms and notifications today. We just traded metal bells for digital ones. But if you think about it, that little bell did more than just organize our day. It created moments, the laughter in the hallway after it rang, the whispered "see you after class," the relief of the final bell on a Friday afternoon. Those were the real lessons. The bell taught us that time moves on, whether we're ready or not, and that every ending, even a small one, makes space for the next adventure. And yet, looking back, it's funny how seriously we took it all. The panic, the rush, the countdown to the next break, all over a sound. But that sound shaped who we were. It kept us moving when we wanted to give up, made us laugh when everything else felt impossible, and somehow managed to turn a noisy, chaotic building full of tired teenagers into a functioning system of organized chaos. So now, whenever I hear a bell, any bell, I can't help but smile. Because no matter how far we've come, a small part of us is still standing in those hallways, waiting for the next ring to tell us what's next. And maybe, just maybe, the real trick isn't waiting for the bell anymore, it's learning when to ring it for ourselves. You know, when we were kids, we had this beautiful, ridiculous confidence that the world was basically our personal buffet of dreams. Ask any of us back then what we wanted to be, and the answers were limitless: astronaut, movie star, football legend, singer, zookeeper, dinosaur. Yes, someone always said dinosaur. We believed in our potential with the same energy we believed in recess. And why not? Adults told us we could be anything. That's the kind of statement that sounds inspiring until you grow up and realize anything doesn't include getting paid to nap or getting extra credit for being funny in class. It all started so innocently. The teacher would hand out that "what do you want to be when you grow up?" worksheet, and suddenly you were planning your life like a 5-year-old CEO. You draw yourself in a superhero cape holding a stethoscope because apparently you were going to save lives and fight crime on weekends. Everything felt possible. Then reality came along, wearing glasses and carrying a report card. Turns out you needed math to be an astronaut, science to be a doctor, and coordination to be an athlete. That's usually when the dreams started to crack a little around the edges. By middle school, the cracks had become craters. That's when we all started realizing the world doesn't always clap for our creativity. Someone wanted to be a poet. That's nice, but how will you make money? Someone wanted to draw comics. Cool, but what's your backup plan? Backup plan, that's when the dreams started breaking, piece by piece. Suddenly, the goal wasn't to chase what made you happy. The goal was to chase what looked good on a college application. And then came high school, the factory of realistic expectations. You remember that phase, right? Everyone suddenly had to pick a career track, as if choosing between chocolate and vanilla could determine the rest of your life. The counselors would ask, "What are your strengths?" And you'd be sitting there thinking, "Well, I'm great at pretending to understand geometry." But they'd nod and hand you a brochure for something like applied technical administration, and you'd think, "Ah yes, that sounds like something I can Google later." We were told to dream big, but not too big. To take chances, but only safe ones. To find ourselves, but preferably by the end of senior year. And if you didn't, well, the bell rang anyway, and life kept moving. The funny thing is, everyone had that one dream that seemed bulletproof. The one you were sure would stick. For some it was music, for others it was art, acting, or sports. But somewhere between the science fairs, exam schedules, and late-night cram sessions, reality whispered, hey, maybe not. And that whisper hit harder than any test grade ever could. But here's the twist. Those broken dreams didn't vanish. They just changed shape. Remember that class clown who swore they'd be a stand-up comedian? Maybe they didn't make it to the stage, but now they're the life of every office meeting. The kid who wanted to be a vet but fainted at the sight of blood. Maybe they work in design now, still caring for things, just in a different way. The point is, most of us didn't lose our dreams. We just reassembled them using whatever pieces reality left behind. And honestly, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Because if everyone actually became what they dreamed of in third grade, the world would be run by superheroes, astronauts, and professional snack tasters. Society might collapse under the weight of all those capes and cookie crumbs. The truth is, life needed us to pivot, to trade in fantasy for flexibility, and sometimes that pivot leads to something even better than the original plan. I remember this one kid, let's call him Brian, who was absolutely convinced he'd be a rock star. He even practiced his autograph before he learned to play guitar. Every lunchtime he'd perform with his imaginary band, the Electric Panthers, in the corner of the cafeteria. Years later, I ran into him working as a music teacher. He laughed and said, "Turns out, I did become a rock star just for a smaller, more honest audience. That's the thing about broken dreams. Sometimes they don't really break. They just bend towards something real." And sure, at the time it felt dramatic. Who among us didn't have that teenage moment of staring out the window, thinking, this is not how my life was supposed to go? It was like we were living in our own slow-motion movie montage. But life wasn't mocking us, it was editing the script. Some of the best stories come from those detours. The kid who failed every science fair might now design amazing buildings. The quiet artist who doodled in math class might now create logos seen by millions. The truth is, broken dreams aren't the end of the story, they're the rewrite that makes it interesting. Of course, at the time, no one told us that. Adults just gave us those motivational posters with cats hanging from trees, hang in there. Which didn't really help when your biggest dream had just been flattened by algebra. But if we could go back and talk to our younger selves, we'd probably say, relax, the dream isn't gone, it's just taking the scenic route. And maybe we'd also tell them that success doesn't always look like we imagined. Sometimes it's quieter, sometimes it's funnier, sometimes it's just finally figuring out how to be okay with where you've landed. You don't need a stage, a spotlight, or a rocket ship to live a meaningful life. Sometimes the real dream is just waking up happy with the person you've become. Looking back, those so-called broken dreams weren't failures, they were upgrades in disguise. Because let's face it, if everything had gone exactly as planned, we'd probably be bored. The missteps, the plot twists, the times we said, well, that didn't go how I expected, that's where the real stories live. Those are the bells that rang when we least expected them, reminding us that every ending can sound like a beginning if you're willing to laugh about it later. And maybe, just maybe, our dreams didn't break at all, they just grew up with us. There's something beautiful about the way we can laugh at the things that once made us cry, especially when it comes to school days and all those so-called failures that used to feel like the end of the world. Back then, one bad grade could make you rethink your entire future. You'd stare at that red ink on your paper and think, well, that's it. Goodbye, Harvard. Hello, life as a traveling street magician. But give it a few years, and suddenly that same memory turns into the funniest story at reunions. Time doesn't just heal wounds, it gives them punchlines. Humor is the great equalizer. In school, it was our survival strategy. Forgot your homework? Make a joke. got called on when you weren't paying attention, crack a line to distract everyone, failed a test, well, at least you could still win at making everyone laugh about it. Laughter made embarrassment bearable. It turned panic into perspective. We learned that if you could laugh about it, you could live through it, and boy, did we have things to laugh about. Remember how serious everything felt back then. A pop quiz felt like a government emergency. A forgotten locker combination was a full-blown crisis. Getting called to the principal's office felt like standing trial for war crimes. It's funny now, but in the moment, it felt like life or death. We didn't realize that the world was much bigger than that bell schedule. We thought everything important happened within those walls: friendships, heartbreaks, exams, and cafeteria politics. But once you step outside, the world keeps ringing with new bells: jobs, bills, deadlines, family dinners, and the endless question, so what are you doing with your life? It's like the universe upgraded the school bell to a more stressful ringtone. The difference is, now we get to decide how we respond. We can panic like before, or we can laugh and say, "Ah, another pop quiz from life, didn't study for this one either." The beauty of growing up is realizing that the world doesn't hand out report cards for happiness, kindness, or creativity. Those are self-graded, and most of the lessons that really matter never came from a classroom. They came from moments of pure chaos, forgetting your lines in the school play, tripping in the hallway in front of your crush, or bombing that big presentation you swore would define your future. Spoiler alert, it didn't, none of it did, but each of those moments taught you something: how to recover, how to adapt, how to laugh even when your face was redder than the teacher's pen. I think that's what the final bell really symbolizes, not the end of something, but the beginning of understanding that life doesn't come with perfect timing or clear schedules. There's no bell that says, "Now you've made it." You just learn to make peace with the unpredictability. You find your rhythm in the noise. You learn to ring your own bell when it's time to celebrate, and sometimes you learn to laugh through the awkward silence in between. The older we get, the more we realize how little those broken dreams or embarrassing moments actually matter. No one remembers that you once misspelled banana in front of the entire class, or that you failed your first driving test so badly you accidentally hit the curb twice. The only one still holding onto that memory is you, and you really don't have to anymore. The trick is to let go, to see the comedy in it all. Because life is basically one long improv show, and the people who do best are the ones who can roll with the unexpected scenes. And let's be honest, school trained us for that better than we realized. Every time the teacher said, "Pair up," and your best friend was absent, that was improvisation. Every time you gave a presentation you'd completely forgotten about, that was performance under pressure. Every time you walked into a test thinking it was next week, that was pure survival instinct. Those little disasters taught us to stay calm, keep smiling, and pretend we knew what we were doing, which, come to think of it, is basically adulthood in a nutshell. There's also a kind of freedom in realizing that nobody's keeping score. The same way no one cares that you once wore mismatched socks to class. No one in life is really judging your path as harshly as you think. Everyone's too busy figuring out their own schedule, missing their own metaphorical bells. Once you let go of the idea that you're late to some imaginary destination, you can actually start enjoying the ride. And laughter, that's the sound of freedom. It's the bell we get to ring ourselves. When we laugh at our past, we're not mocking it. We're celebrating that we survived it. We made it through the awkward stages, the heartbreaks, the failures, and the weird haircuts. We made it through growing up, and that deserves a standing ovation, or at least a really good laugh. You ever notice that the people who seem happiest aren't the ones who had the smoothest journeys, but the ones who turned their rough patches into stories? The ones who can say, Remember that time everything went wrong, and laugh like it was the best day ever. That's real strength. Not perfection, not flawless achievement, just the ability to laugh at the mess and keep moving. Because in the end, the dream isn't about reaching some perfect destination. It's about learning to dance or maybe stumble through the journey. The bell rings and we move to the next thing. We fail, we laugh, we adjust. And if we're lucky, we find people to share those laughs with, people who remember the same halls, the same bells, the same ridiculous drama that seemed so huge back then. And maybe that's the real lesson. Life keeps ringing bells one after another. Some signal change, some mark endings, some remind us to pause, but none of them mean it's over. Every bell is an invitation to begin again with a smile, a laugh, and maybe a slightly better sense of humor than last time. Because if school taught us anything, it's that every chapter, even the messy ones, is worth ringing a bell for.